Politics senior reporter Stephen Collinson and White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Susan Crabtree. Good morning.
Good morning.
Susan, let me start with you. You heard there from Athena the report that the president said, forget about the little, and we know the word that goes there. I mean, with the issues that are coming up, tax reform, the debt ceiling eventually, going to the budget, the nitty-gritty, the details matter. Can he operate like a chairman of the board here?
You know, I think that this whole situation was really a failure, not in really the art of the no deal, as people like to talk about, but it was really a failure of the art of the sell. And I don't necessarily think a president needs to know every single detail. You know, certainly Bill Clinton was very conversant on every single detail, and that helped him with his relationships on Capitol Hill. But in this situation, I think this was a matter of rushing it through, not getting the House Freedom Caucus on your side early on, not talking to the Tuesday group till way late in the process. I mean, President Obama had 13 months or more to get his version, the Obamacare through, and in 2010. And that he was crisscrossing the country. He had more than 40 events dedicated to selling this to the American public, getting people on his side in key swing districts. And, you know, it's interesting to me that, you know, he's always priding himself as the closer. But in Washington, what matters is not the money behind. You don't muscle through your negotiations. These members are beholden to their constituents. And that's what they care the most about.
Let me bring in Stephen here. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. I want to take you back to May of 2016 when then campaign chairman Paul Manafort told this to the Huffington Post in their search for a VP, that he needs an experienced person to do the part of the job he doesn't want to do. He sees himself more as I said, the chairman of the board than even a CEO, let alone the COO. So was this strategy of using the president to bring down the weight on these House members the wrong strategy? Should they have used the vice president? I mean, that's what his job was supposed to have been, considering what we heard from Manafort several months ago.
Well, the vice president was involved in the negotiations. He spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, but I think there's no substitute in these situations for presidential power and the persuasion of the bully pulpit. I think it's going to be very interesting, Victor, to look when the White House moves on to the next efforts, tax reform, for example, which is, if anything, much more complicated than repealing Obamacare, whether we get a more concentrated, detail-orientated input from the president. If it's a bill that emanates in the White House to start with, and it's born in the White House, maybe the president will be more conversant and more committed to the details of it.
Let me jump in here. You say that there's no substitute for the bully pulpit of the president, but what if you consider, as we saw from the reporting from Dana Bash and Athena Jones, if the president doesn't know what he's talking about, he doesn't seem to be curious about it, and you know he doesn't know what he's talking about, how persuasive is he then?
No, that's a very good question. Now, if you listen to the president talk about his real estate dealings in the past, it's clear that he's a much more persuasive influencer, because it's clear he does know what he's talking about in that situation. So that would probably point to the fact that the president needs to be more down in the nitty-gritty. But there's another point here, I think, that perhaps the president and his team need to rethink their approach to governing. Right now, the president has not done an awful lot to reach out to people outside his coalition. That has basically brought his approval rating down to about 40% or even lower. In that position, the influence that the president is eroded. He's not quite as persuasive as he might be if he's up at, say, 58%, 60% during his first 100 days. So the political equation here is very, very important.
Susan, let me come to you and what we also learned about White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Stephen just talked about the coalition. Many of these members represent districts in which President Trump did very well. Steve Bannon went there and he laid the hammer down, but didn't convince the Freedom Caucus, very conservative group. What's the lesson for Bannon here?
Well, a lesson again is that you need to let this play out a little bit longer than 64 days. The members of Congress like to have regular order. They like to have hearings. They like to have their voice heard. In the defense authorization process, you have amendments and they're allowed on the floor. And people, if they fail, that's the political reality of the situation. This is sausage making. It takes a long time. You go to people's districts. You talk to them about what they want to get them on board on a bill that they necessarily may not want to support. But you do have this House Freedom Caucus. They want to show that they're pure. That's their brand. They want to show that they're conservative. They're beholden to their constituents. And I talked to some members of Congress on Capitol Hill on Friday when this was all going down, and they said, you know, at first, these members may not support anything. If they wrote the bill themselves, they may not even get to yes. But the problem, you saw that back in 2013 when they shut down the government. They need to show that they're conservative. They want to take a stand. Then, after they do so, they're more likely to come on board if they're involved in the process.
And we saw a little bit of that kind of looking ahead to the next few fights from the vice president in West Virginia yesterday. We're going to talk more about what he said, looking ahead to the confirmation of Gorsuch and tax reform and the wall that was promised. Susan Crabtree, Stephen Collinson, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bernie Sanders is